Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the CPI Post-Brexit Transition Period webinar. I'm delighted to be able to say that we have over 100 attendees on this webinar, and I'm looking forward to what will be a very, very interesting morning of presentations covering a wide range of issues of interest to the UK's paper-based industries concerning the post-Brexit transition. Just a quick introduction for myself. My name's Andrew Large. I was appointed Director General of the Confederation of Paper Industries in August 2016. I've got nearly 30 years experience across the UK and Europe in trade associations, business and government. And I've been leading on Brexit issues for CPI since my appointment. And I'll be acting as moderator today and helping to field the Q&A, introduce the speakers and make sure that we have hopefully a lively and interesting session. Before we go any further, I would be very grateful if people could pay attention to this competition law notice. Obviously, we have over 100 people today engaged in this meeting from across the UK's paper-based industries. Clearly, compliance with competition law is extremely important. And I must make sure that people do not disclose commercially sensitive information during the webinar and should not do so outside of it. And in particular, private messaging other members via Teams or other apps during the meeting regarding commercial or strategic business issues is strictly prohibited. Now, I know that we issue these competition law notices at the beginning of all CPI meetings, and I'm very pleased to say that our compliance has always been very, very good. But that is because we keep putting these reminders at the beginning of all the meetings to ensure that we do continue to comply. So thank you very much for your cooperation with that compliance. And I'm now very pleased to start the formal part of today's sessions with the presentations on Brexit. And before we get into the individual presentations, what I would like to do is to just give a few words of introduction. The UK is undergoing a period of very, very significant economic and political upheaval. There are multiple simultaneous challenges underway. We have a global pandemic. We have very significant global economic dislocation caused by that pandemic, caused both by the disease itself and the public healthcare challenges from that, but also the measures to combat the disease, the widespread lockdowns across Europe, the challenges for business as a result. And these all sit on top of what has been a challenge for the UK over the past 4 years, which is Brexit. And the focus of today's webinar is Brexit and what is going to occur at the end of the transitional period on the 31st of December 2020, and what are the issues that UK's paper-based industries need to ensure that they are up to speed on if they're going to make a continued success of their businesses in these new economic circumstances. So today's programme is going to cover the following key issues. So we're getting an update on the negotiations with the free trade agreement with the European Union. We'll be having a conversation about certification and CE marking. We'll be looking at food labelling issues, GDPR, REACH and environmental legislation, and then finally the border operating model. And I'm very pleased to introduce that we will have speakers from both BEIS and DEFRA. Now, this is a very interactive session. I'd like you to let us know through the Q&A if we're missing something, but also we have a second session booked for the 2nd of December, at which there will be an opportunity for us all to pick up on issues that we've missed and also get a further update on where we are with the free trade agreement and any other transitional period issues that have come to light since. It's clear that time is extremely short. We are only 7 weeks away from the end of the year, and still a lot remains up in the air, and there is a lot that we are potentially going to need to brief members on in terms of changes between now and the end of the year. Just some housekeeping issues before we get into the meat of the webinar. The session is being recorded, and there'll be a link that'll be sent to participants afterwards, so you'll be able to review the session and pick up on any issues. Please interact with the speakers using the Q&A function in Teams. I'll be asking your questions to the speakers at the end of their sessions. There'll also be a chance for Q&A at the end, and we will also ensure follow-up in writing or on the 2nd of December in the new session. You'll see in the middle of the presentation slide a pointer to the live Q&A event button within the Teams functionality, and that is the way that we'd like people to interact, so we have all the questions in one place. If I could ask you all that, because of some minor time lags in the system, if you could ask your questions early on in each session and make sure that we have names and email addresses with the questions so we can follow up if need be. And finally, in the unlikely event that MS Teams goes down, we've used the bit.ly link as a means of making sure that we can always direct you back into the session. So please log back in with the bit.ly link in the event that things do grind to a halt, because we'll reanimate things, and the bit.ly link will always point to where the webinar is actually taking place. But hopefully everything is operating smoothly as things stand. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. Ryan Diggory should be well known to a number of people within CPI. He's already made presentations to a number of the sector councils and committees of CPI. He's a senior policy advisor on international trade in the infrastructure and materials section of BEIS. And I'm delighted to introduce him this morning, where he's going to give the first session in this webinar, which is an update on the negotiations that are currently taking place between the UK and the EU. So Ryan, if I can hand over to you now, and we can get your presentation on screen and move forward from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and good morning, everyone. As Andrew just said, I'm an international trade policy advisor. My job is twofold. Firstly, it's to represent the interests of your sector and the other sort of materials sectors, so metals, chemicals, and so on, by nagging my colleagues who are in negotiations to reflect sectoral needs and interests. And at the moment, increasingly, it's to try to help businesses navigate all of the guidance that's out there to prepare for the 1st of January. As we go through, I'm going to cover a lot of subjects today fairly quickly, but one of the main reasons we're here today is to take your questions, answer as many as we can, and go to the experts with ones that we can't answer. So please don't be shy, and we will endeavour to get all of the information that's out there to you, and hopefully a form that's easy to use. Next slide, please, Katie. So the first thing is, I think, to reflect upon negotiations. So I'm not going to repeat what we'll see in the news about fisheries and subsidies and so on. I think the positive thing, let's start with that, from the perspective of people like me who are involved in backing up the UK's negotiators on lots of the detailed issues, especially on moving goods, is that there have been intensive talks, especially so over the last few weeks, where both sides are actually talking about their legal text, and that's what will be important eventually. And although there are lots more disagreements than those that are reflected in the news headlines, there has also been a great show of willing from both sides to compromise on some of those detailed areas and come to a solution. It is, I'm sure, incredibly frustrating to all of you that we do not know the results of negotiations yet, when you're already making orders or receiving orders, and you don't know under what trading terms will be when those are fulfilled, and we totally understand that within government, and part of the reason we wanted to talk about these issues today is to try and help you get clarity where we can provide it. I thought it was worth having a reminder of what a free trade agreement of the type the UK is looking to agree with the EU will get you, and I guess by extension what it won't. So, of course, we are looking for a free trade agreement to give tariff-free market access, although the flip side of that is that people will have to prove the origin of their goods in order to make use of an agreement. Tariff-free market access as a principle is something the UK and the EU fully agree on. The detail of how we go about ensuring that is obviously still under negotiation. But yes, a free trade agreement will secure tariff-free market access for the vast majority of traders. So that's one simple thing that it gets you. I've listed some other important and relevant issues on screen. These are all things that the UK is trying to secure as part of these negotiations. We'll talk a little bit about customs procedures in a bit, and yes, we are trying to make to agree all sorts of clauses in the free trade agreement that will make things like different customs authorities talking to each other a lot easier in the future, and will also help with things like using the UK as a distribution hub, for example. So there are procedures trying to secure as part of FTA discussions that will make those things easier. I think the main thing I would say today on that, though, is that all of the actions we will talk about later on borders will still apply either way. So yes, a free trade agreement might get you tariff-free market access. It is not going to remove the need for customs declarations, and it is not going to leave the UK remaining in the EU's VAT zone. So all of the things we're going to talk about later on customs will apply either way, and everyone therefore needs to be making their preparations for those right now. There's a few other things on there that we're not going to touch upon in great detail today, but just to say as well that within the free trade agreement of the type we want, the UK is looking to maintain visa-free access for people doing hands-on work between the UK and the EU. So you will see that people will still be able to travel for business trips and meetings and sales and so on, even in a non-negotiated outcome, or some of you might call it no deal. But it is worth being aware that, for example, if you're sending an engineer to the EU, the default for a third country is that there will be requirements on what qualifications they have, won't necessarily be recognised by the EU member state, and there could be visa requirements as well. We're not going to touch upon that in detail today, but I'm happy to take questions on movement of people as well, as it is a very important issue. We will talk briefly today about goods regulations, and also later about chemical regulations as well. And just to say that, yes, there will be some differences there between a free trade agreement and a non-free trade agreement scenario. So, for example, if your goods or your customers' goods have a conformity assessment, the UK is looking to agree with the EU that conformity assessments done on either side would be recognised by the other. That is not applicable in the default no-deal type scenario. So a few things there that a free trade agreement might get you. What I hope you can see is that there are lots of things that aren't on the list there. So it really is important now to make your preparations in those areas and not to wait around for negotiators to conclude their business, because there are very many things that you will have to do either way. Next slide, please. Let's wait for that to come through. I think it is also worth mentioning many of you will be trading with partners other than the EU. And I'm also very happy to take anyone's questions on where the UK is with its other free trade agreement negotiations, including those with partners that we've had existing arrangements in place with as members of the EU. So unfortunately, the UK has not concluded negotiations with Norway and the EFTA states, for example. So if those are important to you, I'm happy to take questions on that as well. And although we have signed so-called continuity deals with Switzerland, with South Africa, with South Korea, recently with Japan, there are some negotiations that are still ongoing. I mentioned Norway, also Turkey and other markets such as some Balkan states and Mexico. So if for any reason you or your customers are reliant on those free trade agreements, the negotiations are still, unfortunately, underway and not wrapped up yet. There's a link there on screen though, and these slides, by the way, are designed very much for you to take away, read like a book and click through to the relevant detail. So hopefully that'll be of use to you. Next slide, please. Sorry, Katie, there's a couple of bullet points that I put on animation. There we go. So we're mentioning quite a few things today. There are, however, many other issues, some of which I've touched upon, such as movement of people. It's a good example that we're not going to in detail today. So if you haven't already, you are of course encouraged to go to gov.uk/transition, where you can answer a questionnaire about your business, and it will spit out the relevant guidance pages for you. Again, I'm quite happy to follow up one-to-one with people on the call if you're just struggling to find relevant guidance for you. We recognise in BEIS that it is not always easy to navigate what's published out there, and part of our job as a team is helping you to do that, which I hope we will in some small way today. But there you go. If you really do want the full suite of guidance, you are advised to obviously go to that main government guidance link. Next slide, please. Same problem again, Katie, I'm being annoying. If you're not bored of webinars after this one, and I sincerely hope you're not because it's very useful to you, there are other webinars available at that link there, including some videos from HMRC that give you the basics on importing goods, VAT and issues like that, and also some other policy specific webinars that are being hosted by my department, BEIS, as well. So we're going to touch upon goods regulation today, for example. You will find at that link a link to a webinar which goes into that in fuller detail. Many of you who are high volume traders should also have been receiving communications direct from HMRC. It'd be interesting to know whether those have been helpful to you or not, because one of my many tasks at the moment is haranguing HMRC. So quite happy to take questions there as well. And I will be doing a short presentation covering some of the highlights from the border operating model later. It is a very long document, but it is the best summary of information on customs procedures and road freight. It does include also annexes that talk about road freight with France in particular, for example, if you're worried about traffic through the short straits. Also, I think we'll be able to put around a kind of informal crib sheet that might help you to navigate that document after today's session as well. And of course, I'm sure there'll be questions on border issues later on in that part of the presentation. Next slide, please. So I think there's a little delay in terms of questions, but we have had one that has already come through from David. So I'm just going to read this out for everyone else's benefit and for mine too, by the way. Sneaky tactic there. David asks, he says, our main raw material currently has an EU duty suspension on it. Looking at the proposed duty rates in 2021, and this is the UK global tariff, It says this has an autonomous duty suspension and will be decided later. Do we have an indication whether GB will continue with the suspension or when a decision will be made? How can we lobby to continue the suspension? David's added there that the raw material comes from outside the EU, so that's from the US and the Far East. David, this is a very good question, and it's one that people have asked me for about 4 months or so now, in great numbers. And frustrating as this is, my colleagues at the Department for International Trade do not have clearance to publish the new regime yet, but I'm going to Chatham House rules and all that give you a little bit of a preview of what they might say. So yes, there are a series of suspensions of duty that are currently in place as members of the EU. Now, what I can say is that every indication we have is that when the UK publishes its approach to duty suspensions, you're not going to see any of the existing ones being taken away. That publication date is probably a few weeks away now, but I hope that that answer gives you a little bit of reassurance. That is not confirmed, I will say, but we've had no indication when we've asked the question that any of those duty suspensions that are currently in place will not be in place from the 1st of January. But I'm not allowed to say that, so keep it under your hat. What they will do at the same time, of course, is to publish the ongoing process for how traders in the UK can apply for new duty suspensions. So that will be published at the same time. As I said, unfortunately, and frustrating as this is, because you're probably placing these orders right now, if not already, I'm afraid you can't take that as absolutely firm 100% confirmation from my mouth. We do need to wait for the official announcement. But as I've said, I haven't seen. My expectation would be that there won't be any products knocked off that existing list. So I hope that is helpful, although we will have to wait for the official confirmation. There's just one more there, I think, from Amy before I hand over to the next speaker. And that's what would count as a high volume trader. I'm not aware of our business. That's a good question. So I don't have the exact figures HMRC are using, I'm afraid, but HMRC said again a number of months ago that for, and it's based on tonnages that traders are importing into the UK. HMRC was due to contact all of the highest volume traders to take them through the actions that we'll go through later. So Amy, if you haven't heard from HMRC, hopefully this means you won't have missed out, because we will be covering most of the things they would have gone through on their phone call with you anyway. So do not worry if you haven't received a call from HMRC directly. I will give you the chance to pose questions on some of their issues later as the designated HMRC stand-in today. I hope that's all been helpful for you, and that's it for me from now.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Ryan. Just before we close on your session, I had one further question that came in advance during the webinar, which is, what is the final point that business will be made aware of the end point of the negotiations?
That's an extraordinarily good question, Andrew. So it won't surprise you that I don't know an awful lot more about that than you do. We are told, certainly, that it will be a small number of weeks, right? So 2 to 3 weeks, something like that. Obviously, there is a ratification period involved in various parliaments. So the negotiations really cannot drag on into December, I wouldn't have thought. It is incredibly frustrating, I know, but negotiators are still trying to strike a deal that works for both partners, and hopefully even though that's creating uncertainty, it will be worth it in the end. The job of people like me is when the agreement is struck, we will have to come out to you again and help you work out how you make use of that agreement, and that's something we will do as soon as we can. But I'm afraid I cannot say exactly when negotiations are going to conclude.
No, thank you very much, Ryan. I mean, you're quite right to point out the frustration that the business is feeling on this, but yeah, as much notice as we can get of the eventual endpoint, the better, I think. So thank you, Ryan. And I'm now delighted to move on to our second speaker this morning. Somebody again who is well known to the CPI team. He's the Assistant Director of Energy Policy in the Energy Intensive Industries team in BEIS. He's somebody who's worked very closely with CPI on issues such as the 2050 roadmaps for carbon emissions reduction. And at this point in the webinar, Arjen Haveke is going to give us with regard to certification and particularly product marketing. So well, while we get your presentation queued up, Arjen, that's over to you. Thank you.
Morning, I'm Arjen Haveke. I'm going to try to put up my presentation. There we go. You also see that. So as mentioned, my name is Arjen Haveke. I work in the energy intensive industries in BEIS. I normally deal with energy and climate change policies in BEIS, and the team I'm working in runs a compensation scheme for certain energy intensive industries, including paper and pulp, and we're also involved in various exemption schemes from indirect renewable costs. But within that team, I'm the sector lead for paper and pulp, and because of that, I've also taken on the job of helping the sector out with the impact of COVID-19, as well as with Brexit. I'm not working in the goods regulation team. That's not a bit of BEIS, so bear with me when I walk you through the presentation. This presentation has been given yesterday as a webinar that my colleagues in that team presented, and it's basically this presentation that I'm going to show you. So bear with me, I'm not a specialist on goods regulations. Happy to take on questions at the end, but I'm not quite sure whether I'm able to answer any of those, but do ask them, I can always take them back and ask to my colleagues. First thing is, again, trying to inform you to help identify the actions you need to take. As Ryan mentioned previously, regardless of the free trade agreement or any agreement, there are certain actions that all companies that trade with the EU or import from the EU will have to take. If you find more support on websites, and links will appear later on again on the slides for this. So placing goods on the market from the 1st of January. So currently we have more or less a CE approach which applies to all countries in the EU. But there will be a new approach from the 1st of January. Goods with CE marking, it will impact on goods with CE marking, toys, PPE, machinery. So it is important, particularly for packaging companies, paper packaging companies, to have customers to manufacture, for example, products with CE marking. It doesn't apply to all sectors, but for medical services, it's a little bit different. And the first thing is that goods with CE marking may be placed on UK market until 1st of January 2020. So there's an additional year, basically, for the sector. This is an easement that the government has introduced to allow more time to adjust. So things will not change, most things will not change, particularly from the 1st of January 2020, but from January 2022, so there's an additional year on that. And all the codes, basically, there will be changes to the old approach. The next slides will go into that. But it depends on the specific goods. slightly different from, as mentioned, from medical devices, but also different for chemicals, for vehicles, and aerospace. Chemicals is quite important again for the paper industry. My colleague from DEFRA, Simon, will go into that in the discussions with this. What we currently have in the approach is a mutual recognition between certification bodies in the EU. But it mutual recognition will no longer apply for non-harmonized goods to the furniture. So this impacts again if you manufacture paper for furniture, packaging for furniture, for example. Again, there are mentioned special rules for some goods, including medical device, construction products, and so on, and food labeling as well. So that depends again on the type of product you use. So for certain products, there's special goods regulations as well. So what will change? So placing new approach to goods on the market. First thing to say that goods already put on the market or will be put on the market before the 1st of January 2020 will not change. There will not be any retrospective measure to make it change. So just to set that to the side, luckily. So no retrospective changes. Then again, placing CE mark goods on the GB market. Business should take steps now for the upcoming changes to the domestic regime at earliest opportunity. A year extension for CE mark goods, but we really urge companies to start taking action now already, as Ryan mentioned before. Now, CE mark goods that meet EU requirements can continue to be placed on the GB market in most cases until 1st of January 2020, as highlighted previously. In most cases, again, it doesn't apply to all goods, it doesn't normally like medical, but for most of the goods as well, it continues to apply to the 1st of January 2020. It's different the other way around, placing CE mark goods on the EU market. If you place a manufactured good on the EU market, you must take steps now basically to comply with EU requirements from the 1st of January 2021. So from basically first of next year. So that's slightly different. So the UK government has put in an extra year for easement, but really the strict deadline applies to any product, almost any product that is being put from the UK on the EU market. So this is the difference. We currently have a CE regime, and the UK will move to the UKCA regime. So on the CE regime, if you're self-certified or use a EU notified body, you can still use CE mark until the 1st of January 2020. And you just use your EU declaration of conformity until that time. The CE mark will still be required for products placed on the EU market. So if you export into the EU, you need to comply basically with CE mark. You can place UKCA and CE mark on the same product if it's destined for both GB and EU markets, as long as the products meet both markets. So there's an additional marking that needs to be provided on a product that complies with both the UK regime and the EU. Now we move to the UKCA. From the 1st of January 2021, new products must be assessed against, can be assessed against GB rules by a GB approved body. And what the bodies, basically the current notified bodies, are designated to be certification bodies. Next slide will go into that. If you're currently self-certified for the CE mark, you can do it also for the same thing with UKCA mark. From 1st of January 2020, the essential requirements and standards must be used to demonstrate the compliance with the market. So you need to basically you need to base from 1st of January 2020 essential requirements and standards that can be used to demonstrate an argument to be applied for UKCA. Timetable for this is mentioned. From 1st of January 2020, you can use the UKCA marketing. In some cases, it will need to apply immediately. If so, you should get ready to use it by before this date. There's a year extension for the UK government. You will need to use UKCA for most goods from the 1st of January 2020. You can continue to apply products that had a CE marking for the UK market. Until the 1st of January 2023, for most goods you can affix a UKCA marking on the label affixed to the product or on the accompanying product. And from the 1st of January 2023, it will basically period domestic regime. So changes to the conformity assessment bodies for the new approach. For the GB market, all basic notified bodies will automatically become UK approved bodies from the 1st of January 2020. You can find which one these are on the EU member database or on the UK website, and there's a link at the end of the presentation where you can find information. If your product requires third-party conformity assessment, this will need to be done by a UK recognized body from the 1st of January 2020. In most cases, depending on the product. In case of the EU, from the 1st January 2021, mandatory conformity assessment by UK bodies will no longer be recognized by the EU unless there's some kind of agreement between the EU and the UK bodies. And we encourage business to speak to the existing conformity assessment body to discuss options for them. Taking action now to ensure products on market compliance. So what do you need to do? If you plan to put goods on both the UK and EU market, you should start preparing everything now. Contact your notified bodies as soon as possible to understand the options for conformity assessment for the UK and EU markets. This is particularly relevant if you export to the EU. Arrange for a separate certificate for the UK and EU markets already well in advance of the 1st of January 2022. There may be a requirement for a level of reassessment for a second certificate. So again, we encourage all businesses to start planning now, soon and contact your notification body. Again, check your legal responsibility for the new approach goods. What will your legal responsibility be? Will it change? Responsibility falls on so-called economic operators who deal with CE and UK CE market goods. This will change from the 1st of January 2020. Economic operators including manufacturers, importers, distributors, and authorized representatives. In case of import, this UK-based distributor of EU goods may become an importer and will later. Authorized representatives, they must be based in GB or Northern Ireland for the GB market. And the same applies for the EU. GB-based authorized representatives will no longer be recognized in the EU. EU legislation coming into force on 16 July 2020 means you will need to appoint an EU representative basically for your product. So, and things get a bit more complicated in case of Northern Ireland, because that's where the Northern Ireland Protocol applies. The Northern Ireland Protocol comes into force on basically 1st of January 2020. For as long as it applies, goods placed on the EU on the market in Northern Ireland will need to meet the relevant EU rules. So that includes CE marking. The CE marking will continue to be the relevant marking good for most goods. If you sell certified for CE, you can continue to do this when placing goods on the Northern Ireland market. The CE marking will need to be accompanied by the UK NI market if you use a UK notified body to assess against EU rules. Again, you never apply for a UK NI marking just once. If an EU notified body is used, you will only need to use the CE marking. A UK CA alone will not be valid for the Northern Ireland market. So it's a bit more complex on the Northern Ireland market, because basically for the Northern Ireland, because of the protocol, EU rules continue on CE will continue to apply to Northern Ireland. So placing qualifying Northern Ireland goods on the GB market. The government has guaranteed unfettered access. Footnote, for qualifying Northern Ireland goods for the rest of the UK market. This means in practice that qualifying Northern Ireland goods market, CE marking, or CE plus, UK marking can be placed on the GB market, so in Great Britain, England, Wales, and Scotland. For highly regulated goods, such as chemicals and medicines, there's a slight difference, but it applies less for paper and pulp. The government has already published guidance on unfettered access, and further guidance will be available soon, and we'll send that around as soon as it's published. I'm going to just skip over questions and do it at the end, because there's some further slides on this presentation itself as well. Basically, these are just checks what we think you need to do. First of all, time is running out. You guys left the EU, although during the transition periods, EU will still apply. But businesses need to be thinking about the actions they need to do now to prepare themselves for the 1st of January 2021. From January 2021, this will mean a new relationship with the EU, which is currently being negotiated. That's why I'm explaining. And it's time for you to set basically new rules. Although negotiations are coming, there are a number of actions business can take no matter what outcome, again, as Ryan already emphasized in the beginning. So this is what we encourage you to do. Go to the website, visit gov.uk/2016. There's a few questions over there, and then it will home into the particular points that are relevant for you. And we encourage to sign everybody up for emails to get updates when things change, when we publish new guidance, when we update guidance, or when there's an output from the relevant output from negotiations. This is a slide with relevant links, and we'll share the slides anyway, so we will have these links as well, and we encourage you to go on the slides if you think it's necessary to prepare you for input. Do not find the same slides. And final point is act now. But of course, new rules will come coming from the 1st of January. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. Ian, your sound unfortunately has been a little bit difficult, so I was hoping. Thank you. If you could mute, that's very grateful. Thank you. Can I just apologise to participants for the slight challenging with the sound there from Ian. We have had a couple of questions. What I was going to suggest was, rather than going back to Ian, given the sound difficulties, we'll take those questions offline and we'll make sure that we get them resolved as quickly as possible. The first one, Ian, you should be able to nod for, which is, are you happy to share your presentation? Thank you very much. And the second question rather, is about self-certification to UKCA and about whether there are any residency or nationality requirements for that. But can I suggest, Ian, we take that one offline and we get back to the questioner in order to be able to give them a clear answer. So with that, Ian, if I could just say thank you very much to you and to your colleagues for putting together that presentation. I think that's been very, very useful as an overview of the issues with regard to certification and CE marking rather, particularly as representatives of the packaging industry. We're going to be responsible for putting a lot of those marks actually on the outsides of materials, and it's important that we get them right. And again, if I could remind people to submit questions using the Q&A function in Teams. We've had quite a lively set of questions coming in so far, and I think that really helps the interactivity of this webinar. And again, if I could encourage people to keep doing that. We've got Ian Ryan and later on Simon Johnson here from DEFRA as speakers, so it's very, very good opportunity for people to ask questions of those speakers on these important issues. So I'd now like to welcome Ryan Diggory back to the microphone. Having covered an update on the negotiations for us beforehand, he's now going to be covering two particular issues of interest and importance to the industry. The first is GDPR, which is clearly going to be a potential challenge for both customer data and also staff data and how they're shared in the UK, between the UK and potentially the EU. And then also following on from what Ian was saying about sort of packaging and labelling type issues, a specific one here about food labelling issues, which I know is going to be of importance to packaging side of the UK's paper-based industries, who are responsible in many cases for printing the labels on food packaging. So that's all from me at this point, and I'm now very pleased to hand over again to Ryan and to introduce him to speak on these two topics. Thank you.
Thanks again, Andrew, and hello again, everyone. Just wait for the slides to come up very quick there. Yep, so we're going to do food labelling first very quickly. And just again, this is a relatively short session with quite high level instructions on what the rules are going to be. Clearly, we're happy for questions as they come in. If we need to go to the relevant policy teams, we will chase that detail for you and send the results of that background Also at the bottom of the slides on food labelling, you can see the link there to the official guidance. So rather than just listening to me, you are of course encouraged to go to that guidance page, which has this information but also further detail, including on particular product groups. So it is very much worthwhile clicking on that link at the bottom of the page when you do get the slides through to actually go into some of the detail. So very quickly, I'm going to look at the EU rules first. So obviously this applies to people who are exporting from the UK to the EU. What does your business need to know? Well, first of all, you should check with your EU importer because they are the ones who should be looking into how to comply with the rules, and they also need to be aware that they will be an importer, which is a change in legal circumstances from where they've been before. Sounds simple, but I have heard stories of people who do not want to engage even at this stage in those discussions. So it is very much worth, of course, having the commercial discussion with EU customers first of all. So food of animal origin, it's placed on the EU market before the 1st of January, can continue to circulate without any labelling changes. So this is what we call, and there's a few of these, one of the goods on the market issues, and this is where the withdrawal agreement comes into place. The withdrawal agreement, of course, is already an international treaty, so this is something that is not going to be impacted whether there's a free trade agreement in place or not. Food of non-animal origin placed on either the UK or EU markets before the 1st of January can continue to circulate as well without labelling changes. Now, what does placed on the market mean is the next question there, and the answer, a good for these purposes is placed on the market in the EU when it is first supplied for distribution, consumption or commercial use, whether free of charge or not. To give an example here, if you've already got some stock, it's got existing labelling on it, and it has been placed for distribution, perhaps been sold to a distributor in the UK, for example, and that occurs before the 1st of January, then those goods won't need any labelling changes to them in order to circulate, as long as there's, of course, proof that it was placed on the market. So it doesn't have to be sale as such. It can just be, it's been manufactured, it's actually been physically labelled, and it has been put in a warehouse for distribution, right? The act of placing it in the warehouse for distribution is putting it on the market for the purpose of the withdrawal agreement. So an important distinction there. And again, there's more detail in the guidance itself. All food placed on the EU market from the 1st of January 2021 will have to meet EU labelling rules. So there is no standstill or grace period beyond the end of the transition period for goods that are newly placed on the market. Next slide, please. So a couple of details here taken from this guidance. So food business operator addresses, food is pre-packaged, must have an EU or Northern Ireland address for the food business operator, or an address of the EU or Northern Ireland importer on the packaging or food label. So just to clarify here, the goods on the market issue from the last slide, that still stands. But for any goods placed on the market after the 1st of January, you'll need to have all of the new addresses in place, either importer or operator. You must not use the EU Organics logo from the 1st of January either, unless the UK control body is authorised by the EU to certify those goods for export, or the UK and EU agree to recognise each other's standards called equivalency. So here you go, this is an area where negotiations on the free trade for the free trade agreement will have an impact, and obviously it is a very late stage, as we've said before, but there is a clause in the proposed free trade agreement that would enable that equivalency, so still not confirmed yet, unfortunately. If the UK does not have that equivalency deal with the EU, you cannot export organic food to the EU and label it as organic. You can still export it, of course, using all the non-organic labelling and meeting the other requirements discussed, but you simply can't label it as organic. Next slide, please. Likewise, the EU emblem, using that on goods produced in Great Britain from the 1st of January will not be allowed unless you have specific authorization from an EU authority. And food from GB must not be labelled as Origin EU from the 1st of January either. Again, as I've said, if a good's already been placed on the market, it will be allowed to be shipped to the EU. So if it's placed on the market in the UK, say before the 1st of January, the very act of doing that will enable you to, say, sell it to the EU in the next few weeks without relabelling, but it must have been placed on the market. Food from Northern Ireland can continue to use Origin EU labelling. It should be confusingly also labelled to show that it's from Northern Ireland specifically. Next slide, please. So that's a little discussion of some of the rules for sending material into the EU. And now we need to look at bringing materials into the UK as well. So the top lines here are that any required labelling changes for goods that are going to be sold in Great Britain only need to be made by the 30th of September 2022. So there is a grace period here for Great Britain. That is, of course, not the case for sending goods into the EU. Your label can contain other information if you need to comply with labelling requirements for another market. So, for example, if goods need to comply with EU rules because they're being distributed to Northern Ireland and or the Republic of Ireland, as well as in Great Britain, for the purposes of the British authorities, you'll be able to have both labels, both addresses and so on there, and that will not cause a problem with the regulators. So regulators in the UK will allow the other labelling to still be on there, whether that's confusing or not to others. Under the Northern Ireland Protocol, goods sold in Northern Ireland will continue to follow EU rules for food labelling. So that's very important caveat there, especially as a lot of your customers will be still, of course, using Great Britain as a distribution hub for sending material, of course, to Northern Ireland and perhaps to the Republic of Ireland as well. So this duplicate labelling may be required. Next slide, please. And just a few of those other key points on UK labelling. So in terms of their food business operator addresses, prepackaged food sold in Northern Ireland again must include the EU FBO address. Same issue again applies with goods on the market that I discussed earlier. If the food business operator is not based in Northern Ireland or the EU, you must include the address of the importer who is based in Northern Ireland or the EU. You can continue to use an EU, British or Northern Ireland address for the AFBO on any prepackaged food sold in Great Britain until the 30th of September 2022. So just a reminder of that grace period there. Organic logo, the UK, same rules apply for obviously selling into the EU and Northern Ireland, as we discussed above. You can continue to use any approved UK organic control body logos for goods sold in Great Britain, but you must change the statement of agriculture to UK agriculture or UK and non-UK agriculture. Country of origin labels, so food from and sold in Great Britain, can be labelled as Origin EU until 30th of September 2022, after which, of course, it must be labelled as Origin UK. And of course, a reminder, there are different rules for Northern Ireland as there are for all sorts of issues we're discussing today. So I hope that is a helpful quick run through there. I think there is a little bit of a delay, so I haven't seen any questions yet. In any case,
Ryan,
sorry, Andrew.
Sorry, there's a couple of questions have come in here. One of them, I think, is they're all from the point of view of the position of corrugated manufacturers, particularly who are producing packaging. The first one is about the timing of the changes. What you've just presented, Ryan, is quite a sharp cut-off point. But obviously there is packaging in the supply chain at the moment that is already printed with the labels on it. And I wanted to ask what's going to happen to that packaging. Does that packaging become immediately obsolete and require recycling at this point, or is there a period through which that packaging can then move out through the supply chain to be replaced by new packaging that is being produced from 1st of January onwards?
Thank you for the question, Andrew. That is a good one. It is one I will need to confirm the answer to. However, from my angle there and my reading of the guidance, unfortunately the law is quite stark on the issue, and it really is the goods must have, to comply with EU law, the goods must have been actually placed on the market, right? So as I said, that can be being just put for distribution if it's at that stage in the process. If it doesn't reach the distribution stage of the process before the 1st of January, unfortunately, it doesn't seem to me as if it would comply with EU law if it's then being exported after that. And that is, of course, a massive issue. But that is definitely my reading of that guidance. I would encourage people to go to the official page. I'm not particularly familiar with this exact policy area, but to me, the withdrawal agreement does seem pretty stark on that front. It is, if the goods are on the market before, what is it, 11 o'clock UK time on the 31st of December, then fine, they can continue, they can circulate with the labelling as it is. If it's beyond that time, even by 5 minutes or whatever it might be, I'm afraid that would not be the case in law from what we can see in the guidance there and what's in the withdrawal agreement itself. I understand that is clearly a very big problem for a lot of goods, but that is my understanding. We can clarify with colleagues who are working in the policy area as well, but to me that seems pretty clear from the guidance.
Yeah, no, thank you, Ryan. I mean, I would appreciate some clarification, as I'm sure with the members. And I do have one final question here, which concerns duplicate labelling. Clearly, particularly for goods that are destined for Northern Ireland, it may well be that they need to have UK legal and EU legal labels on at the same time. And I wondered whether there were any rules about prominence of those labels, ordering, positioning, and so on. And because these kinds of very technical issues can become a really important barrier to trade. And as the people who print the labels on the boxes, this is really the sort of thing we need very detailed information on to avoid printing tens of thousands of boxes that sadly end up being non-compliant because the labels are in the wrong place, they're the wrong size, whatever that might be.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, it won't surprise you to know that I will need to take that away. I think it's clear from the GB perspective that I don't believe there are going to be stringent requirements there. That may not be the case from the EU side, and obviously, as you've said, if you're sending goods into Northern Ireland, you'll need to comply with the EU rules. So I will have to take that away. But yeah, thank you for the question. It's an important one.
No, well, thank you very much, Ryan, and thanks again for your presentation on this issue. I'm very grateful if you could just pick up and take us forward on the border operating model.
Thank you.
Okay, Ryan?
Yeah, so I think instead of border operating model, we've got a quick update on personal data transfers first, which I'm happy to do.
Thank you.
So, and my apologies everyone for skipping about with the subject matter, but another sort of quick update on an area that has the potential to catch you out, and I hope it doesn't, partly because of going through this update today. Again, something else that we're not going to cover in a huge amount of detail, but what I will do is put the link round to the Information Commissioner's Office website that does have sort of useful scenario-based guides, different ones for large companies and multinationals who may be caught out by this issue, and for SMEs as well. So very quickly, what is the problem? The problem is that in GDPR legislation, you are not allowed to transfer personal data outside the European Economic Area, this is EU plus EFTA states, without either the EU having made what's called an adequacy decision for the country you're trying to send the data to. So the EU says, yep, their legislation's fine, you can transfer data without any additional actions, or contractual clauses either within your organisation or between your organisation and another that you're sending the data to. Now, the issue here for businesses in the UK at the moment is that the EU has still not, although it's been assessing the UK, it has still not given the UK this data adequacy status. So this may still happen in the next few weeks, in which case everything will be fine, and you'll be able to send personal data from the to the UK without any issues. But if it doesn't happen from the 1st of January, technically speaking, you'll be breaking GDPR law in the EU if you're sending personal data, and this could be anything like someone's name, address, and so on, to the UK without having inserted some simple contractual clauses that either within your organisation or between your organisation and one you're sending data to. So it's worth mentioning that sending data in the other direction from the UK to the EU will be unfettered, right? So there's no action that's required there as far as the UK or EU authorities are concerned. Next slide, please. So there's some simple actions here. I say simple because they're simple to read. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean they're always simple to do. And the first thing, of course, is to work out where you are taking personal data from the EU or wider European Economic Area. You should map what data you're taking from where. This may be the case, for example, I know some of you will be on the call and you'll be within multinational groups where you might process HR information and send that between offices in the EU and the UK. That's a classic example of where you might need to take some further action to ensure legal compliance. You can, as I said, the answer to this is putting in place legal safeguards. So there are in GDPR some standard contractual clauses that will enable data to keep flowing legally from the EU to the UK, and I will pop the relevant web link for the Information Commissioner's Office guidance page. If I just can share that very quickly, and that should pop up for you in the Q&A area. Either way, we can of course share this after today's event. There are on there, there's an interactive tool that you can use to ensure that you're legally compliant from the 1st of January onwards. This is of course yet another one of these things that we might not have thought about too closely in the past. And as I've said, the EU may make an announcement before the 1st of January that means you can continue to take personal data from the EU to the UK without having to take any further action. In the event that that doesn't happen, these contractual clauses will need to be in place to remain compliant with GDPR. That's the main message today. As I said, we're like for the other areas, we'll be happy to take any questions you've got away to our colleagues in the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. Sorry, Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. Not that digital matters too much. And we will get back to you afterwards as well. But I would encourage you all to use the Information Commissioner's Office guidance. It is relatively easy to follow at that point in time, but of course the more difficult bit would be actually putting the contractual measures in place. Thank you for that. Andrew, do you have any questions that I haven't seen?
Yeah, there's one question that's come in directly to me, which concerns what do companies need to do with data that has been lawfully collected in advance of the end of the transition period?
Thanks for that. That's a good question. I will unfortunately have to take that away. As far as I'm concerned, though, from my reading of the guidance, I would think that unfortunately it's the date of transfer that matters in terms of compliance with the law rather than the date of collection. So if the data is already held, then from my reading of the guidance, that should be fine. But if it's moved afterwards, that is not the case. But that is only my reading as a layperson, and I will take the question away.
Thank you. I think that's potentially very important, Ryan, because it does create the potential nightmare scenario that, for example, if you have cross-European HR function and you're moving staff data around between servers because that's what you do in order to make sure that you have backups and you don't lose it and so on. You have data which on the 31st of December 2020 is perfectly legal, it was collected legally, and then your server backup on the 1st of January is potentially unlawful. And so we really need to have some clarity on that, because this is lawfully collected data, it's being lawfully used at the moment. It would be, I think, counterintuitive to make it unlawful, just with the change of a date.
I agree. I think the thing to say, though, for organisations that are large and are moving HR data around, please do look into putting the contractual clauses in place right now. So that's the meaning of the presentation. As I understand it, in terms of having binding corporate rules within the organisation, that may actually be simpler than waiting around for the answer to the question, if you see what I mean. So I would encourage all of those organisations to look into putting in place the binding corporate rules anyway, rather than wait and see. But I will, of course, take the question away.
No, thank you very much, Ryan, and we'll certainly make sure that we follow up with our members once you've given us the clarification. So thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce again Simon Johnson. My apologies, Simon, for the difficulties that we had before. Katie, if you could pull Simon's presentation up on screen, then I'd be delighted to hand over to you.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks, Katie. So I'm going to focus on REACH in this presentation, but also, as Andrew said earlier, say a little bit about the HSE chemical regimes as well, particularly classification, labeling and packaging and biocides, and also a bit of an update on the environment bill. So quite a lot to cover. I'll focus on REACH. And certainly happy to take questions on REACH as well. However, I think I'm certainly not as versatile as my good friend Ryan in Bayes, so I will leave any questions relating to HSE and the Environment Bill, and we'll pick those up later, and I can take those back to HSE colleagues. And Just to say something, we've already heard quite a lot about the Northern Ireland Protocol. That certainly has an impact on chemicals as well. So perhaps just to put the presentation quickly into context, in terms of referencing UK REACH or talking about Great Britain REACH, under the protocol, then UK REACH will regulate the Great British market, while EU REACH will continue to apply in Northern Ireland. The domestic REACH regime is still relevant to Northern Ireland producers because businesses there will still need to participate directly in UK REACH. And also, I'm referencing UK REACH pretty much throughout the presentation because apart from anything else, I'm hoping it avoids any confusion given all the many references we made to UK REACH over the last 2 or 3 years. Thanks, Katie. Next slide, please. So what will UK REACH mean for industry? Well, both the UK and the EU would operate REACH, but the two systems would not be linked in any way. This means that businesses will need to take certain actions in order to maintain access to the EU 27 market and the UK market as well. Companies from both markets would have third country status in the other. And I think the key point is the fourth bullet point here, because this places new obligations on UK companies as a result of the UK leaving the EU. Essentially, UK companies importing chemicals directly from EU suppliers will change from being downstream users as they are currently under EU REACH, which of course still applies to the end of the transition period, and will become importers instead. And this will place certain obligations on them. Next slide, please, Katie. So from the 1st of January, we'll put in place our own independent chemical regulatory framework, UK REACH. UK REACH will carry over the fundamental approach and principles of EU REACH, including the principles of no data, no market, animal testing as a last resort, and the precautionary principle as well. There are 3 main building blocks in establishing UK REACH: legislation, the IT system, capability and capacity. So in terms of legislation, we've just laid before Parliament a 4th statutory instrument on REACH. That was laid before Parliament on the 19th of October. And that further statutory instrument addresses issues around the Northern Ireland Protocol and also makes changes to the transitional provisions for the deadlines for businesses to provide data, the necessary data. And I'll say a bit more about that shortly. The SI, like the other SIs on REACH, will be ready to come into force on the 1st of January. And this 4th SI, the one covering the Northern Ireland Protocol and the grace period provisions relating to data, will now go through Parliament, be subject to parliamentary scrutiny, and will come into force on the 1st of January 2021. We're building our own IT system as well, which we're calling Comply with UK REACH IT. Again, that system will be very similar to the one operated by the European Chemical Agency in Helsinki. So as far as possible, we're keeping the same processes, the processes that businesses will hopefully already be familiar with. And that will include using the same digital platform as well. We've carried out a lot of user testing on the IT system to make sure it's fit for purpose, and it will be ready to go live from the end of the transition period. And we're continuing to do user testing to make sure that it will have the necessary functionality from that date. Capability and capacity is key. The Health and Safety Executive, the HSE, will be the regulatory agency for UK REACH and will be supported by the Environment Agency. Both organisations are recruiting a lot of new staff to build up their resources, particularly scientific and technical expertise. And likewise in DEFRA here in the chemical team, we're recruiting more staff as well to make sure that we have the necessary resources, expertise to make sure that UK REACH fully functions and we have a fully effective regulatory framework. Next slide, please, Katie. So what are the actions that businesses need to take? Well, for accessing the UK market, there are essentially two situations. Existing UK held EU REACH registrations will be grandfathered, which is the term we're using, into UK REACH. So essentially they will be automatically carried over to ensure continuity and minimize the impact on businesses. And in that situation, the grandfathering scenario, then the businesses concerned will have 120 days in order to provide the HSE with some basic information relating to the substance in question. The second situation is the one I mentioned briefly at the beginning, which is that downstream users becoming importers. For those businesses, the previous 180 days from the 1st of January has been extended by a further 120 days. So for those businesses, they will have 300 days in which to provide the UK with some initial information. And then the further changes we've made are to the deadline for providing the necessary detailed information in order to complete the registrations for both the grandfathered registrations and those for the importers. Previously, it was a fixed 2-year period beginning from the 1st of January 2021. But now we're phasing it in depending on tonnage bands and hazard profile. So for the highest tonnage band, it will be a period of 2 years plus the 300 days. So effectively 2 years plus 300 days for the highest tonnage band, 4 years plus 300 days, or 6 years plus 300 days. And if we move to the next slide, we can just see that set out in the table. Thanks, Katie. And what we've done in terms of phasing in the tonnage bands is very much in line with what happened under EU REACH when that was introduced. If we move to the next slide, please. So why did we extend the grace period transitional provision deadlines? Well, we've always been aware right from the very beginning through all the stakeholder engagement that we've been doing that a key concern for businesses was the time and potential costs involved in having to access the necessary detailed information in order to validate their registrations for access to the UK market under our own independent chemical regulatory framework. So following stakeholder engagement last autumn and into this spring with a whole range of different stakeholders, trade associations, individual businesses and NGOs, that is why we have made the extensions to the deadlines. And in particular, we hope that in the case of UK importers, having the additional 120 days will give them more time to establish how their UK-based suppliers have assumed registration obligations, and on that basis decide what actions they may need to take themselves. Next slide, please. There are actions that businesses will need to take as well in order to maintain access to the EU market. Now, in this situation, it's not really for ourselves to provide the detailed guidance, as that wouldn't be appropriate. That's an issue for the Commission and in particular the European Chemical Agency. However, there are two options that UK businesses can take in order to maintain access to the EU market. Firstly, they can transfer their registration to an EU27 legal entity, or alternatively, the EU companies to whom they're exporting may choose to register the substance themselves as an importer. And detailed guidance has been provided on this by ECHA and is available on the ECHA website. And on the fourth bullet point, of course, any registration of a new chemical for access to the UK market will need to be registered with the HSE. And in order to register a new chemical with ECHA, a separate registration would need to be made with the European Chemical Agency. Next slide, please. Data sharing is an issue that we've also had a lot of engagement with stakeholders as well. It's something that we've been very clear we want to replicate the way that it operates in the EU. It is a way of reducing cost to business, and it also helps remove the need for additional animal testing. And working with stakeholders, we've been developing the UK process and also the supporting IT tools as well. And we hope to provide some further guidance on that shortly. Next slide, please. Of course, our preferred option is still to negotiate a deal with the EU that we would hope would remove the need for businesses to access the necessary data themselves. So in our approach, we've proposed a chemical annex, which would be an annex in the technical barriers to trade chapter of the proposed negotiation offer to the EU that would enable data and information sharing mechanism between the UK and the EU. There's little I can say on the state of play of negotiations, except as you will have seen from the news, the discussions are intensifying, and we're pleased to say that what we're hoping to negotiate by way of this chemical annex is still very much up for discussion. And we welcome the fact that businesses and trade associations, both in the UK and the EU, are encouraging both sides to try and reach an agreement on data sharing on the basis that it's in the interest of chemical businesses, both in the EU and the UK. Next slide, please. So to sum up, when it comes to REACH, we recommend that UK and EU businesses identify the chemicals they manufacture, sell or use, and what their regulatory responsibilities will be to that chemical in the UK market. That they check the plans across the supply chain to understand what information may need to be provided in order to maintain access to both the UK and the EU markets, and consider what actions are needed if the status of existing EU REACH registrations or authorizations could change. Next slide, please. So we've provided detailed guidance for businesses that was published on the 26th of October, and I'm happy to make sure that you have the link to that guidance as well as the slides I've just presented on. But if you do have further questions, then please do send them to the shared mailbox on this slide, and we will try and respond to them as quickly as possible.
Simon, before you go on to the second part of your presentation, we've had a question specifically on UK REACH registration, which is to try and ask who is responsible for that registration? Is it the supplier or the customer?
So it would be the supplier if they had an existing EU-held registration, but the customer, if they're now what would have been called a downstream user, who've now become an importer of the substance in question. But the detailed guidance we've just published sets out various scenarios depending on the exact situation of the business concerned. So it gives further information on the grandfathering process and also on the process that downstream users who are now importers and have those new obligations would need to follow.
Thank you, Simon. That's very helpful.
I'm going to slightly awkwardly quickly switch to a presentation that's been shared by HSE colleagues, and I'm just going to pick up some of the highlights from that to give you a good idea of what's going to apply in the case of biocides and classification, labeling and packaging as well. A lot of this will be very similar because essentially existing EU legislation is being lifted and shifted into UK law. So in the case of...
So sorry to interrupt, Simon. Are you trying to share your presentation?
No, that would be too awkward, I'm afraid. I'm just going to pick up a few points that HSE colleagues have sent me, just to pick up some of the highlights if that works for you.
Yes, that would be fine, Simon.
Thank you. So the HSE will act as the agency competent authority for Great Britain for both classification, labelling and packaging and biocides. And this means that applications and notifications that previously went to the European Chemical Agency will now go to the HSE. And the HSE will introduce processes for receiving and processing biocide applications. In terms of a legal framework, as mentioned, the EU legislation will be lifted and shifted into UK law by the EU Withdrawal Act. All the EU decisions legally in force on the 31st of December 2020 will be carried over into UK law. So, for example, CLP harmonised classifications and the biocide active substance decisions. And the HSE are putting in place statutory instruments in order to give effect to that from the 1st of January. And in fact, their own most recent statutory instrument was laid before Parliament also on the 19th of October, and like the one on REACH, will now go through parliamentary scrutiny and come into force on the 1st of January 2021. And that one, as with the one I mentioned in relation to REACH, very much focuses on giving legal provision to the changes relating to the Northern Ireland Protocol. In the case of classification, labelling and packaging, then much of the regulation will continue to apply. The main duties and obligations on manufacturers, importers, downstream users and distributors to classify, label and package the substances and mixtures that are placed on the market will remain. And they must also comply with the mandatory classification and labeling as well. And worth adding that the UK will effectively adopt the United Nations globally harmonised system in the same way as the EU at the end of the transition period. In terms of the main changes on CLP, we'll have our own independent classification, labeling and packaging system. There will be a new notification arrangement with details to be sent to the HSE as a new agency, and there will be new requirements on GB-based distributors and downstream users who are currently supplied by the EU 27. And a bit like with REACH, they will become importers after the end of the transition period if those supply arrangements continue. On biocides, then HSE will lose access to the European Chemical Agency IT tools, and they'll also lose access to the data stored in the ecosystems. This means that applications and data will need to be submitted to the HSE, and there'll be a 90 or 180-day resubmission deadline for ongoing product or active substance applications, and a 2-year deadline to resubmit the data to remain on Article 95. And the HSE have also published further guidance on its website, and I'll make sure that those links are also sent to all of you. And I will check with HSE colleagues whether the slides, which give more detail, can also be shared with you as well. So that covers very quickly a run through the HSE chemical regimes, particularly CLP and biocides. I'm just quickly going to say something about the state of play in the Environment Bill, and then happy to take any further questions that may have come in. So as you probably know, the Environment Bill has resumed its passage through the House of Commons and is currently in the committee stage. Once the bill's completed that committee stage, then the legislation will be subject to further scrutiny, after which it will move to the House of Lords for further debate and scrutiny. As I'm sure you know, the Environment Bill aims to set a new framework for environmental governance and to provide new tools and approaches aimed at delivering an improvement in the natural environment and reverse biodiversity loss. It will place the 25-year environment plan on a statutory footing, establishing ambitious targets and providing new tools, including biodiversity net gain and conservation covenants. And it's also intended to enable greater collaboration as well at a local level. When it comes to chemicals and specifically, then it will give effect to our ambitions, intentions under the 25 YEP in relation to chemicals, and specifically on REACH, it will carry across those key principles of EU REACH that are being carried over into UK REACH, as I mentioned right at the beginning of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. Thank you very much for covering those topics, not just in your own area of responsibility, but also beyond that. I have a couple of questions that have come in, and I'm not sure whether you'll be able to respond to those directly or not. The first is a question about becoming an importer under REACH, and somebody has a question. So unfortunately, it's come from anonymous, but they'd like to understand what the financial costs might be of becoming an importer.
So there are two main costs of the consequence of becoming an importer, having previously been a downstream user. One will be the cost of the fee for effectively registering that substance under UK REACH. Now, when it comes to the cost of that fee, then by the lifting and shifting of the EU regulations into UK law, we're effectively carrying across the existing fee regime as under EU REACH. So the fees will be very similar and will be dependent on tonnage bands, and there will continue to be discounts for SME businesses as well. The other cost, which is harder to quantify, will be the cost that businesses may incur in having to negotiate access to the necessary detailed information in order to complete their registration. And so, as outlined in my presentation, some basic information will need to be provided within the 300 days from the 1st of January 2020. We expect that that information will already be available to the businesses concerned. However, within the 2-year, 4 or 6 year, depending on tonnage band, plus the 300 days, they will need to get that detailed information that was probably pulled together by a group of producers coming together in a consortium, pooling their resources and providing the necessary data in order to register that substance with ECHA. It's difficult to know to what extent costs will be incurred in relation to that and what those costs may be. We know that in some cases it may be in everyone's mutual interest for that information to be made available with no cost being charged by, say, the lead registrant. However, it's probably fair to say that we don't really know how all that's going to pan out until after the 1st of January. But we are aware that there are likely to be costs involved, and certainly, understand that those costs could be quite substantial. One of the ways we've tried to mitigate that is by extending those deadlines to allow businesses longer time in which to access that data.
No, thank you, Simon. That's helpful. 2 other very quick questions. First question is, when does the government expect the Environment Bill to pass into law? And the second question is, will food contact compliance test certificates expire prematurely on January the 1st?
I can't answer. Well, I can't answer either of those, I'm afraid. The Environment Bill, I think, will be a very difficult one to answer at this point. It will be very much determined by the bill's passage through Parliament. And on the second one, that's one I'll need to take away and get an answer from colleagues, please.
Thank you, Simon. If you could do that, I'd be very grateful. And thank you again, Simon, for your participation today. That's been very, very much appreciated. And I hope you don't mind if, now that we've got your contact, we start funneling questions from our membership over to you on what is clearly going to be a very, very significant regulatory change. So,
no problem at all. And we'll answer questions as quickly as we can. As I say, we'll make the slides available, plus that detailed guidance, which I think hopefully will be very helpful as well, in terms of if you can share that with those on this call and also your members more widely, please, Andrew.
Be delighted to do that, and thanks again, Simon. I'm now pleased to hand over to our final speaker of today and to welcome back to the podium Ryan, who's going to cover global trade and border operating model issues for us. So thanks again, Ryan, for your contribution today, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Hello again, everyone. I hope you're not getting too bored of my voice. I certainly am, but hopefully you're not. I'm going to go through some of the basics here in terms of moving goods and some of the administrative requirements. As I mentioned right at the start of this morning's session, it is absolutely worth the material on this slide that's on screen at the moment, perhaps. Almost everything stay the same whether there's a free trade agreement in place or not. There will be a full customs border. Free trade agreement will not take that away. And the UK will definitely, GB, Great Britain will definitely leave the EU's VAT zone. So all of those actions related to those two things, the customs declarations, VAT and fiscal representation and so on, things we might touch upon in a bit, will be requirements whether there's a free trade agreement in place or not. Now, I know for many of your final products, the EU does not currently levy most favoured nation or so-called WTO tariffs anyway. However, many of you will be importing materials that would, in a non-negotiated outcome, so without a free trade agreement in place, incur a tariff, and is absolutely in those situations worth familiarising yourself with the UK global tariff. This is a slight change from current import tariffs that we have as members of the EU Customs Union. Most of them have gone down, been rounded down or taken away entirely, but some do remain. So it is absolutely worth checking at the on screen what the tax rates would be for certain items you are importing. Now, obviously, the aim is still that these apply to imports from the EU because we are negotiating a free trade agreement, and the same goes for imports from some of the other markets I mentioned here as well, where we are in negotiations. They will, however, apply to imports from places like China, other markets. Obviously, we're seeking to have an agreement in the future, but it's certainly not going to be anywhere near ready for the 1st of January either. So it is absolutely worth checking the rates that may apply. As mentioned earlier, just to add to the level of complication here, there are duty suspensions in place as well, and as I responded to the question earlier, unfortunately we've not published what those are going to be, but obviously as soon as that is published, we will put that information around via CPI. Next slide, please. So let's look at import to the UK first of all, and I hope you can hear me clearly. I've got a report that my audio is suddenly not as good as it was earlier. I will try to slow down a little bit just to see if that helps. So many of you will already be familiar with this, so I'm just going to touch upon very briefly, and you can then ask questions about some of the details later on, some of which, of course, I may need to pose to HMRC colleagues, but I will absolutely do that. So, from the 1st of January, the EU will have full import and export controls in place. This means, there's no further grace period or anything of that nature. Anyone importing goods into the EU will need to issue the declarations to the EU customs authorities, and the same goes for exports. This also means by extension that if export declarations will be required to as well for goods that you are sending to the EU. Earlier on we mentioned, and this may come up again, the issue of the withdrawal agreement and what happens at 11 o'clock UK time on the 31st of December. The guidance here in the withdrawal agreement is quite clear. So if the goods are already being transported on their way, they can go through under the current rules. If the physical movement of the goods has not started, they can't. The controls will be in place and declarations will need to have been made in order for the goods to go across the border. For imports into the UK, we are introducing what we call staged controls. So for the vast majority of types of goods, the UK import procedure will be very much simplified between the 1st of January and the end of June. So for the majority of goods between those 2 points, you can defer making a full import declaration to HMRC and simply keep the relevant information in your own records. Alongside deferring the declaration, if there are any tariffs due on those imports, you can defer those as well, and the payment when you actually come around to making the declaration. You don't have to do this. You can make full import declarations and pay tariffs up front from day one if you wish. The option is there for almost all goods. There are exceptions to this. They include controlled chemicals and things like basic steel and aluminium products, so hopefully not too relevant to most of you, but happy to take questions on those further. From the 1st of July, all UK import controls will be in place, and you'll note if your customers are importing animals, products of animal origin, or products of plant origin as well, full import controls will be in place from the 1st of April. So that's the staging post in the middle there. Next slide, please. So another exciting subject, but unfortunately one that we all have to engage with at the moment. So as I've mentioned, regardless of what happens in free trade agreement negotiations at the moment, the UK will be leaving the EU VAT area, and that means that, of course, there's a VAT border where there wasn't one beforehand. So if goods travelling in either direction will have VAT charged upon them on import. For imports into the UK, if you're VAT registered, most of you probably will be, you will be able to use postponed VAT accounting. So let's say you have a quarterly VAT return, instead of paying VAT when the goods actually move, or your forwarder paying it on your behalf, you can defer that as well. This is open to imports from all across the world, right? So the staged customs declarations are only for imports into the UK from the EU. This postponed VAT accounting applies to imports from anywhere and will be in place from the 1st of January. If you choose to defer your customs declarations, you have to use VAT postponed accounting. So that's worth bearing in mind as well. VAT registered traders not choosing to, or not otherwise able to defer customs declarations will still be able to do postponed VAT accounting. If you're not VAT registered, the option would be, if you want to defer the payment of import VAT, that you'd have to use a duty deferment account. As I'll come to in a second, HMRC has made the process of applying for one of these slightly easier, and that process applies right now. So I think the advice across the board is, if you're an importer of record in the UK, please do look into applying for a duty deferment account. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to run through some of the key actions. I'm well aware these are at high level, so my apologies to you if this seems like teaching you to suck eggs, but I, of course, will take some more detailed questions and answer those where I can. The very first thing to do when thinking about who's going to make a declaration and who's going to pay import VAT is what your commercial terms are. So everyone, as a first step, needs to think about their contracts with EU suppliers and or customers. For example, if you're left delivering duty paid from the UK into the EU, it is you who has to arrange for import declarations to be made in the EU, and it is you who will pay, either through an intermediary or directly, the import VAT in the EU as well. This brings with it all complications, unfortunately. So if you are in that situation, it is absolutely imperative for you to look into the EU rules ASAP. You may also need a fiscal representative, for example. Certainly you will in France, Belgium, Holland and Germany, if you're importing directly into those countries. It's also worth thinking about EORI numbers. Now, seeing as HMRC has been doling these out to everyone with a VAT registration who's trading, you should all have your GB EORI numbers already. These are what identify you on customs forms, pure and simple. Again, in that example, if you're the organisation that's going to be interacting with EU customs authorities, you also need to have an EU issued EORI number as well. So that's one worth bearing in mind. Next slide, please. For the vast majority of people, getting a freight forwarder or customs agent to do these declarations for you is very much the sensible thing. So, of course, if you haven't got one of those already, now would be an extremely good time to do something about it. Some of you may be choosing to do customs declarations yourselves, and if you are in that position, it's just worth knowing that there is training and limited amounts of funding available from HMRC as well. For the vast majority of people, however, it may make more sense to have an intermediary do things for you. As I mentioned before, if you're importing into the UK, the recommendation is to apply for a duty deferment account. This will enable things like tariffs, as we discussed earlier, otherwise known as customs duty, and import VAT, especially if you're not doing quarterly returns, to be paid once a month through direct debit, rather than having to be paid per consignment as goods actually enter the country. So to set one of these up, you need to apply for a deferment account number and be authorised by HMRC. So just to be clear, lots of people who are using freight forwarders or customs agents for their imports into the UK, you can, most of them, almost all of them will let you use their duty deferment accounts. However, that may not be the case into the future. It is certainly a recommendation that traders have their own. New rules have just been introduced which allow most traders to use duty deferment without having a separate customs comprehensive guarantee. So beforehand, in order to have one, you needed to go through one application for a guarantee before going for a second application for a deferment account itself. That's now been streamlined, so you can do it all in one go, and so that the guarantee requirements are not quite as stringent as they were before. There's a link there for guidance on that particular issue. And that's guidance that's only been released last week, so some of you may have been waiting for it. Also, again, I'm afraid not particularly interesting, but everyone needs to be aware of how to classify their goods for the purposes of customs declarations as well. So there is a link there to how you can do that. If you do have any problems classifying your goods, or your freight forwarder is unsure, of course they're the people who generally have the expertise here, there is a service that HMRC offers where they actually will give you a decision on how your goods should be classified. And there's also a link there, important one again, and again, if you're using an intermediary, they really should be the ones doing this for you. You need to work them, but you will need to be aware, broadly speaking, of how to value your imports for customs duty and VAT purposes. Next slide, please. So from exports, so moving on from imports into Great Britain to exports, there's a step-by-step guide you can use at the top there. I think, again, sorry to labour the points, but your Incoterms are really, really important here. So if you are delivering duty paid, of course, as I said earlier, you will have to be have various registrations in the EU and be familiar with EU import procedures as well as UK export procedures. Some of you may have some questions about road freight. So you might have heard that there are new IT systems that are used specifically for exports on road freight from Great Britain to the EU. Chief among these is a Czech and HGV is ready to go service, which is teams, IT teams are running these things right to the wire, and is being tested with the hauliers at the moment. It's certainly still, of course, HMRC's intention, indeed imperative, that system is in place from day one. So just quickly underneath that system, your intermediary, make sure that the UK exports and the EU import declarations are all made. Your haulier would then use that system. They would input the details of those declarations and be given references, a number, and in some cases a barcode, in order for your consignments to be allowed to move through to port. This is obviously aimed partly at ensuring that non-compliant traders are not literally blocking the way, places like Dover for people who have filled in their declarations, but also to help people just to give them another check process, and so the haulier is happy for goods to proceed. So that's broadly speaking how that's going to operate. Next slide, please. Now, I've mentioned lots of additional procedures, which no one, I don't think, will be happy to see in of themselves. There are various schemes you may have heard about to try and make some of these things a little bit easier and to fit around certain business models, especially where tariffs are concerned, if we are in a situation without a free trade agreement in place. You may have heard of some of these already, so I'll just pick out a couple of them here. And it's worth bearing in mind that because the UK and EU customs areas are going to be separate, if you use one of these procedures, say in your trade with Turkey or China or the United States at the moment, you can in future use it between the UK and the EU because there will be separate customs areas. First one I'm going to mention is common transit, so the Common Transit Convention. This would say be useful if you were transporting goods between Switzerland and UK, so there's a free trade agreement in place between those two partners, and let's say you wanted to avoid making declarations, paying VAT and paying any tariffs that were due en route because your goods are travelling through France on the way to Switzerland. In that situation, you may well want to consider using the Common Transit Convention. Essentially what it does is enable your goods to travel over a border to their final destination without incurring full border processes on the routes on the way. It is not very simple to use, first of all, but it will apply to you if you're doing lots of trade through routes such as that. I'm quite happy to take questions on that as well. I just want to highlight one more thing. Some of you may have heard about inward processing relief, another procedure that's available at the moment, but will apply between the EU and the UK from the 1st of January. So let's say a customer of yours wants to avoid tariffs on their raw materials coming into the UK because they bring them in from the EU and they send their final product back into the EU, then they would look into using inward processing. May not be so applicable to those of you whose main imports are paper and pulp. Next slide, please. So I've mentioned the border operating model. It is indeed a very long document, but if you do want help navigating it, I'm quite happy to provide that. There's also a link there again that was included at the top of my presentation where you've got some videos and how-to guides that HMRC has released. And there are some letters there from HMRC as well, which offer a summary of what the key actions are. I think I've gone through most of them there, but of course it is absolutely worth familiarising yourself with the official guidance, as there are many things that I've not been able to go into in detail. And I think on that note, we'll be ready for some questions. Just have a little break. Oh no, sorry, I missed out Northern Ireland. Katie, sorry, there are some additional graphics, not very fancy ones, on here. I can see there's some questions on GB and EU trade. Frustratingly, we have to think about Northern Ireland as a separate case. And one of the things that's difficult for me when doing presentations like this and talking one-to-one to businesses is that not all of the practicalities have actually been agreed between the two sides yet. And of course, I appreciate how late in the day that is. Here are the main rules, however, and these are from a customs perspective. There are different regulatory issues that I'm sure you can ask questions about. We will try to field. If you're moving goods from Northern Ireland to Great Britain, you should face very minimal restrictions. There will be certain regulatory actions involved in moving animals, for example, or plant-based products, where essentially Northern Ireland is going to remain in the EU's regulatory zone. The same goes for REACH, as I was discussing earlier. But broadly speaking, certainly in terms of tariffs and customs declarations, there won't be any if you're a Northern Ireland-based business sending your goods either into Great Britain or into the Republic of Ireland. So you have that access to both markets largely on the same terms you do now. However, if you're in Great Britain and you're sending goods into Northern Ireland, and unfortunately this is where the joint committee between the EU and the UK still needs to make some progress to iron out the practicalities of how goods are judged. But broadly speaking, your goods will not be charged any tariffs for being sent from Great Britain to Northern Ireland if they're remaining in Northern Ireland. However, goods may be judged at risk of going into the Republic of Ireland afterwards, in which case the EU's tariff border may apply. Customs declarations will be required for this trade from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. However, HMRC is effectively going to act as the freight forwarder for those purposes. If we move on to the next slide, Katie. Thank you. You can see at the bottom there, absolutely imperative. If you send goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland and you want to carry on doing so from the 1st of January onwards, please sign up to HMRC's Trader Support Service. As I've said, frustrating as it is, the exact mechanisms have not been agreed and released yet, but you can sign up to HMRC's service now. They will give you all the information that's available at the current time, and they will also give you bespoke support to make the limited electronic declarations that will be required for that Great Britain to Northern Ireland trade. So that's probably the key message from me on the Northern Ireland Protocol right now. And next please, Katie. So I was a bit preemptive there before. The thorny issue of Northern Ireland clearly not on my mind as much as it should have been. I think there are some questions. Andrew, I don't know if you wanted to act as moderator for those.
Yeah. Yes, I will do, Ryan. Thank you, and thank you so much for that presentation. There is a question that's come in around FSC certified product, and I'm guessing that that's not in the scope of your responsibilities, Ryan, but it is an area that CPI has been looking at. So unfortunately, the questioner was anonymous, so I can't refer to them by name, but if they could let me have their details. CPI's Steve Freeman has been following EU and UK timber regulations, and I'll get him to answer that question and get back in touch with the questioner if we can get their details. Otherwise, there's a question come in from Anne about whether you're in a position to recommend any good importing online training courses and guides for those who are new to this, and really some quite basic sort of underpinning details around Incoterms and tariff codes.
Yes, so one of the links I included was to HMRC's videos. So I'd say as a really basic guide, I would go there first. So you'll get the slides, and so that's included in both in the resources slide I had in the top part of the presentation on negotiations, and as a click through in the slides on borders as well. And again, I'm quite happy to share some further links around. I'd recommend you go for the videos first and then take it from there. There is also links to in the slides. I just went through a step-by-step guide on gov.uk to importing. I would certainly recommend that if you haven't so far, and you feel your business is going to be an importer of record, it certainly is time to look for that commercial advice from a freight forwarder as well. So you might want to go to the BIFA website, BIFA, so that's the International Freight Association, be able to help finding a freight forwarder as well. I will obviously put around some further links here. I find that the Institute of Export, I know you're talking about imports, the Institute of Export website is also quite a good one to check. But certainly, I mean, if you're in that situation and your company is going to be importing under full customs controls for the first time, it certainly is recommended that you look for a customs agent or a freight forwarder as soon as you can. But yes, I'll put around some further links there that I think would be helpful.
Thank you very much, Ryan. There was a second question on whether it's possible to use a hybrid form for declarations and to defer some and complete others in full, or is it possible to do only one or the other?
Yeah, so it's by declaration, it's not by business. So yes, you know, in theory, you can do that if you want to. Okay,
thank you. And then there's a final cluster of 3 questions about the implications of delivered duty paid Incoterms for EU trade. There's a question about VAT in the import country and also whether you need to be registered in that country of import or use a fiscal representative.
Yeah, so it's a good question. The caveat here, first of all, is that different EU member states have different rules for VAT. This is the most annoying thing about this issue in some respects, and trying to find the guidance. In my slides, you will find the links to the actual EU guidance on the matter, so on the export page. So I recommend you click through those links, first of all, to get the official guidance. Unfortunately, you will need to look for the VAT guidance for the specific member states in which your goods are landing most frequently. So let's say they're landing in France. Unless you use the transit procedure or something like that, the import VAT is going to be charged in France. France is a country that requires an importer of record to have a fiscal representative. So that is absolutely a requirement in that particular case. And yet, in some countries as well, you will need to be a full VAT registration. Unfortunately, it is slightly different in different member states. It's very frustrating, but they have a degree of autonomy on this. Something to really watch out for here is you can comply as an importer, and lots of freight forwarders who are based in the EU, and they will need to be based in the EU, will do these things for you in terms of imports, in terms of paying VAT. But beware, if you want to reclaim VAT as input tax, then you will almost certainly need representation. So just beware of that distinction as well, because of course many of you will be, who are exporting to the EU, will not be exporting consumer products, you will be exporting intermediate products, and you're going to want to get that money back. And again, frustratingly, the means by which you do that are different in different member states. But there has been some links there to the official guidance from the EU included in the pack. And if you're having real problems with a particular country, if you do know who your Department of International Trade export advisor is locally, please contact them because the British embassies are providing sort of informal advice to people on who to go for VAT advice and things like that. So don't be shy if you're in that situation. It is quite difficult to navigate the EU's guidance on this because I've tried myself to try and summarise it. It is really quite difficult. So unfortunately, if you're in that case, you may well want to just get some professional advice from an EU-based VAT expert.
Thank you, Ryan. The second question on DDP is about whether you need an EORI number for each EU member state into which you are going to import, or is a single EU EORI number sufficient?
A single one is sufficient. You're recommended to apply for one in the country where the largest volume of goods will land, but a single one is sufficient. Although, of course, you can't use your GB one anymore, right? So the main thing is you will need one from an EU member state. GB one definitely won't mean anything anymore in the EU.
Thank you, Ryan. And the final question on delivered duty paid Incoterms is really about risks on whether Brexit, from the point of view of a UK or a GB business, whether Brexit makes the use of DDP Incoterms more risky.
I think it's, again, this is straying into the commercial realm, but I think the short answer is yes. So all of these things we've just discussed involve cost, first of all, for someone. And I think it's worth here thinking in broad terms about who's best placed to do something. So if you're a UK business, for several reasons, it makes sense for you to be the UK importer. And if you flip that, for an EU business, things like reclaiming input VAT are obviously going to be much easier than they are for you, paying for representatives and negotiating with your customers, negotiating with a forwarder, getting tax advice and so on. So I'd say from a purely administrative point of view, it makes sense for EU businesses to handle EU procedures and UK businesses to handle UK procedures. The unfortunate thing is, we're in a situation where many of the companies I speak to have EU customers who don't want the hassle of being an importer of records suddenly, and that's what leads you into a difficult commercial discussion.
No, thank you very much, Ryan. And a final question on this issue, which is around Common Transit Convention procedures, and it's saying if you don't use the Common Transit Convention procedures and goods are moving across multiple EU borders, are the goods subject to control in each transit company? So if you were trying to ship something to, I know, for the sake of argument, Poland, and your route took you through France, Belgium and Germany, would you have to be controlled in France, in Germany and in Belgium, and then again in Poland on arrival?
No, not within the EU. So now the only issue here would be accounting for VAT through your invoicing. You can use the procedure just for that purpose if you say really wanted to pay the VAT in Poland rather than France. But for broad purposes, you would pay up and declare to the French authorities, and your goods are then in free circulation in the EU and can go anywhere in the EU. The Transit Convention is useful when they're going outside the EU again to another country afterwards. I gave the example of Switzerland. So if the UK already has a deal in place with Switzerland, and it doesn't at this point in time with the EU. So if you were looking to send your goods via the EU to Switzerland, you might want to look into the Common Transit Convention. If they're just travelling through different parts of the EU on their way to their final destination, that shouldn't matter too much.
Well, thank you very much, Ryan, and thanks for your very, very clear answers to those questions. There is one last question just come up, which I will take now, which is, do you know how long intrastat reporting will continue for UK businesses?
I'm afraid I don't know the longer term plans, but what I do know is that it will continue in the short term. You're not the first person to have asked about this either, because it is something of an imposition as well administratively, but it certainly will continue beyond the 1st of January in the short term. I'm not quite sure what the long-term plans are, but I'm happy to take that away and get back to you in writing.
No, thank you very much, Ryan. And thanks again for your multiple contributions today. That's been very, very much appreciated, and I know we've had some very, very good feedback on you and also the other speakers and the points that you've raised today. So that's been very, very useful. I'd now, if I may, just like to conclude our webinar this morning, and I'd just like to give a final opportunity if people want to submit questions using the Q&A functions in Teams. Now is a final opportunity to do so before we move to summing up. One question that's been asked at the moment is really a question that's been asked of CPI rather than of the speakers, which is concerning the way in which CPI is going to operate with regard to Brexit moving forwards. And clearly we have a constant drumbeat of communications with the UK government at both official and ministerial level, looking at very, very key issues with regards to Brexit, and that is going to continue. We will post transition look at hosting further webinars in this sort of format on issues as and when they come up concerning any emerging challenges, and clearly though that may also include some of the post-coronavirus recovery initiatives that are coming out from the government, and we'll be looking to provide information both in this interactive format but also more generally in the format of briefings and CPI news documents and so on, to ensure that that members are up to speed as soon as possible on this. One other issue that people have raised is whether the CPI will continue to be a part of the various European associations that we're engaged in, and the quick answer to that is yes. We will continue to be a part of those organisations, and we're very much looking forwards to being able to continue to be influential with regards to UK legislation and EU legislation, and making sure that whatever gets done in the UK doesn't actually have a challenge when it comes to the EU. We've been asked a question just before I close about having an agenda in advance of the session on the 2nd of December. Yes, I will commit to doing that. I know that there is one issue that has already been brought up with regards to EU timber regulation, FSC certification. We'll certainly make sure that that's on the agenda for our next meeting, and we'll also look at having a further agenda point in place to cover all of the to cover the other issues that that we're going to raise. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for your very, very active questioning all the way through the seminar. I'm very, very grateful for that. Really, I think what I'd like to say is that there is a roller coaster ride ahead. There are big changes coming up, especially in the practicalities of trade, as Ryan has just pointed out, and I think it's fair to say that those requirements are always going to be in place, by which I mean that it doesn't matter whether there is a free trade agreement or not. Actually, the bulk of the requirements are put into to place as a result of the change into the customs union. And because the UK is leaving the customs union, the issues with regard to the border operating model and Northern Ireland will come into force, and that is not something that's going to change. I think the other thing that I would say is that much is still uncertain. We hope that the agreement with the European Union member states will give us some more clarity, but we are going to have to continue to react very, very quickly as events unfold. And that's the reason why we've got the second webinar set up on the 2nd of December 2020. We'll be sending registration documents out for that as soon as possible. We'll look to have a clear agenda for that on the issues that we couldn't deal with today, and also any other issues that emerge. And we hope that as many people as possible will be able to take part. So thank you very much, everybody, for your participating and engagement today. It's been very much appreciated. Thanks again to our speakers, to Ryan, to Arjen, and to Simon. That's very, very much appreciated. Thanks also people who've been very, very busy in the background making this webinar work well, which is Katie Ryan from NOAA, who've been helping us with this, and also Holly in the CPI team, who's been helping to field the questions and keep things moving. So thank you all very much, and we look forward to meeting with you again on the 2nd of December for the second webinar, when hopefully we'll have more clarity on the issues of Brexit. Thanks again.